Good evening, everybody. Nate Eaton here. Welcome to Courtroom Insider. It is the 5th of November, 2025. What am I talking about? 1990. Where were you in 1990 in November? Let's see. I would have been 8. So doing something fun around the house. Anyway, glad you're here with me tonight. We have a jam-packed episode here. Really fascinating episode. I started to listen to a podcast yesterday morning and it drew me right in. I'm one of those people that when I see a new true crime podcast, I turn it on, and if it doesn't catch me in the first like 5-10 minutes, I'm out. And then I look to see how many episodes there are and how long the episodes are. Because if they're really good, like Cold, Dave Cawley's Cold about Susan Powell, got me right in. And when it was over, I wanted more. I was sad that it was over. And he had like 8 or 9 episodes that were like an hour each. That's what this podcast is. 12 episodes, an hour each, around an hour each, about the death, the murder of Martha Moxley. I'd never heard of this case. It happened in 1975 in Connecticut, but it is fascinating. We're going to talk about that, and here on our episode tonight, we're going to have the host, the journalist, and the executive producer of the podcast. They're going to tell us all about it. But first, we got to kick off with Bryan Kohberger. He was in court today. Well, I guess technically he was not in court. His legal team was in court, talking about restitution and how much money, if any more, he should have to pay. Part of the plea agreement was that he would pay for certain things for the victims. The plea agreement was entered. He was sentenced. This was back in July. Then the prosecution came forth about a month ago with another motion saying we actually need around $27,000, $28,000 more to pay for the funerals of the victims. The defense came back and said, why? He's never going to have the chance to pay this money. He shouldn't have to pay it. And there's GoFundMes to cover these costs. So why should Bryan Kohberger have to pay that? Well, the hearing to discuss all this happened this morning. It was about 20 minutes. It was all on Zoom. Here is what Bill Thompson, the prosecutor, here's how he began his argument for the restitution.
At the time that we entered into the plea agreement, Ms. Jennings and I were under the impression that crime victims' compensation could be available to cover reimbursement of travel expenses. And I have to clarify that now. It is true that before trial, the families approached our office asking if there were any resources we were available to pay in advance for travel expenses or expenses related to them attending trial itself. And we looked into that, our staff looked into that, and advised them no. It was my understanding, and I'm mistaken, I realized I was mistaken at this point, but it was my understanding back in early July, late June, when we were talking about the plea agreement, that crime victims compensation could be available to reimburse expenses like that. I now know that's not correct, and it was certainly my mistake. I will own it as far as our state of mind going into the plea agreement. So that being said,
go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. I'll let you finish the point on the plea agreement, and then I have a question for you about that.
And I was just finishing that point, Your Honor, so this would be a good time.
Okay. So it's pretty well settled that plea agreements are interpreted as contracts, which they are. I think it's pretty well settled contract law that a unilateral mistake does not relieve one of its contractual obligations and restrictions. So how can I how can I order this restitution if the express terms of the plea agreement, though mistaken understanding by the state, don't allow such extra crime victims compensation fund reimbursement?
Your Honor, I recognize that, and that's what I was just getting ready to address. In response to the defense's objection, the state has modified or adjusted our position on the restitution. We are, pursuant to the plea agreement, seeking restitution for the funeral-related expenses, which are the urns that are described in Exhibit 2 to our response. We are not affirmatively advocating for the travel expenses and lodging expenses of the family because we do not believe that we can legally advocate for those. At the same time, the families provided those to us, and we want to provide them to the court and counsel just so everybody was aware that they are there, but we are not arguing affirmatively for that because of the wording of the plea agreement itself. So what the state is actually requesting today is just additional restitution for the funeral related expenses, which are the earns for the families.
Now, the defense obviously has a different viewpoint. They're saying, again, that Kohberger shouldn't have to pay because there's no way for him to pay. But the judge had some questions about that.
Given that the state has clarified its position that it's only seeking reimbursement for the earns, it's my understanding that that amount is $1,420 for one family, $1,587.79, and then another $167.79, which would be a total, I believe, if my math is right, of $3,075.58. My understanding of reading the Victims Compensation Code 1953-04 is that the court must still do an analysis on Mr. Kohberger's ability to pay. And as the state has addressed, we are arguing that he does not have an ability to pay. While there have been lump sums provided to you regarding some funds that he received prior to his plea agreement, what the court does not have is a breakdown of how those funds came into the inmate system for his expenses and the fact that they were primarily family. Certainly his situation pre-plea and sentencing was drastically different than it is right now in terms of money that is available to him. And there's nothing in the record to provide the court with anything other than what is really speculation based on the past.
Now, the judge then asked about other ways that Kohberger might be getting money. And we learned that he's had at least 5 figures deposited into his accounts. His defense attorney says it was when he was in the Ada County Jail in Latah County, so not in the prison, but 5 figures. So at least $10,000 up to $100,000, somewhere in that. And then the judge really wanted to make the point that he could make money. Now, his attorney was like, no, there's a Slayer law in Idaho where you can't make money off of your crimes. But the judge made a good point, Judge Hippler, that, well, okay, he might not be able to, but what happens if a documentary company or a book publishing company goes to his family and says, we want to tell your story, the Bryan Kohberger story, and we'll do 6 episodes on Netflix and we'll pay you for the photos and the videos you have of him as a kid all throughout and for $200,000 or $500,000 or whatever the amount is. And they say yes. And then they get a check. And suddenly in Bryan Kohberger's account, there's $100,000. What about that? The judge asked the defense attorney about that.
There's no way that Mr. Kohberger is ever going to profit from any sort of movie or book because Idaho Code 1953-01 specifically precludes that.
Well, it allows that monies are swept from his account for those income to pay certain things. If there's no debt for those certain things, then does the money not go then to the defendant?
That is not my reading of the code. Perhaps I'm reading that statute more broadly than the court is. I understood it to be that the purpose is that someone can't then profit off of their crime pursuant to that statute. I guess I need to read it with
even allowing your reading of it. What's to prevent, for example, a family member from agreeing to provide information, be a part of, etc., a story, movie, book, whatever, TV series about the murders, about Mr. Kohberger, and that certainly wouldn't be monies they receive wouldn't be subject to the statute, and then they certainly would be free to send Mr. Kohberger money to his account what harm is it to order the restitution, which would then sort of jump in line in terms of priority of payments over some of the other ordered payments, such that if Mr. Kohberger does receive money into his accounts from any source, that he's then, that those monies are then put to that use. Certainly, we're not worried about Mr. Kohberger's credit rating with having debts at this point. I'm not sure what the concern would be to, given the uniqueness of this case and the potential for family members, et cetera, to earn money from it, and potentially we've seen members of the public send money to Mr. Kohberger, is my understanding, to his books. What's the downside to ensuring that the victims are as whole as possible from this by ordering the restitution, which again would jump in line from some of the other court-ordered fines, et cetera? And if the money's there, it's there. If it's not, it's not.
Judge, I don't see that Idaho code or Idaho law asks the court to make an analysis on the downside, but whether or not there is foreseeability of payment. And all of the things that you just listed are pure speculation. There is no book or movie that's in the works by any of his family, and to say that those things are going to happen is absolutely speculative, and there's nothing to substantiate those sorts of assertions happening in the future. So
well, there's a history in the 3 years he was incarcerated of him receiving 5 figures put on his books. Doesn't that give the court some history to suggest that such contributions from whatever source may continue into the future?
As I stated earlier, Judge, that was at a different time in the case. That was at a time when, he had not entered a plea. He was not deemed convicted of the crime. The money, a lot of that money was coming from his family to be able to have communications with their son and brother. And to speculate that those types of dollars are going to be able to happen for the next many decades is exactly that. It's pure speculation, not based on something that is foreseeable or based in something that's in fact before this court.
Well, it just seems to me that one of the, really, obviously, even application of statute requires the court to look at what might happen into the future. And I guess, it seems to me one of the best indicators of the future is the past. And in the past, his family has, you're saying the family was the source of much of these funds, has provided him funds in order for him to communicate, et cetera. That necessity will still exist going forward. I'm not aware of his family having disowned him at this point and not wanting any contact with him. And even if they are, that doesn't mean that won't change. And you call it speculation. It seems to me that it is good evidence of what may occur in the future in light of what has occurred in the past.
Well, Judge, there is a judgment against him in the amount of $28,000, and certainly 20% of every dollar that goes into his inmate account is going to go towards paying that $28,000. Another factor that the court actually can look at under 1953-04 subsection 7 is other factors, and those factors that other factors that the court deems appropriate, and that can be collateral resources that the families obtained over $200,000, which definitely reimburse the cost of the earns in terms of economic costs.
I also want to turn to the plea agreement, because isn't a reasonable interpretation of the plea agreement that the defendant will not contest the state's seeking of restitution that is outlined in the plea agreement? Otherwise, why would it need to be in the plea agreement? It seems to me it's the plea agreement, a reasonable interpretation is the defendant is agreeing to pay restitution for those items that are identified in the plea agreement, which includes victims' compensation, which includes in this case funeral expenses. So you took advantage of the plea agreement to get the benefit of the bargain regarding the state's dropping of the death penalty. Why should you not be held to the plea agreement to pay the victims the costs of interning their children?
Judge, I believe that our pleading was clear, that we understood that burns fell underneath a funeral cost, but that once we have a hearing on this matter, that doesn't eliminate the court's duty under 1953-04 to do the ability to pay analysis. And that's why.
Well, are you in violation of the plea agreement by arguing that your client shouldn't have to pay those?
We are not in violation of the plea agreement. If there was any violation of the plea agreement that took place, it's the state seeking this when the other expenses, when it was clear under statute and under the Idaho Victims Compensation rules that those were not reimbursable expenses.
But they've effectively withdrawn those requests and are seeking what's outlined in the plea agreement. What's the point of the plea agreement on restitution if the defense is able to argue against the restitution called for in the plea agreement itself?
Judge, again, in our pleading, we objected to what the state has withdrawn as of this moment at this hearing today.
Right.
We acknowledge that the earns were funeral expenses.
Right.
But once we're in a situation of having a hearing, then this other section about whether or not he has an ability to pay is triggered. We stipulated to $28,000 in restitution within 60 days.
Right.
He met the terms of the plea agreement.
But it also says the state may seek restitution regarding funeral expenses, and they're simply identifying additional funeral expenses. I
don't know what more you want me to say about the earns other than
what's the point of the plea agreement if you're not going to be bound by it?
I agreed that it was $3,075.58.
But you say you shouldn't have to pay it.
What I said was that the court needs to do the analysis under Idaho code about his ability to pay.
Why hasn't the defendant waived his right to rely on that ability to pay by agreeing to those expenses as part of the plea agreement?
I don't know how the court can enter this order today without engaging in the analysis under Idaho code because it's required. That's the way I review the case law and the code, that once there's a hearing about restitution, then the court has to engage in the analysis on the ability to pay.
So the agreement to pay is illusory.
No, he agreed to $28,000. We've agreed that the earns fall underneath.
Does he have the ability to pay that?
No, he does not have the ability.
So why did you agree to it?
Because it was a specific, we were provided with those receipts within 60 days. We were not provided with the receipt for the earns within 60 days.
So is your objection then a timeliness objection?
We did raise a timeliness objection in our pleading. I have thought about that and whether or not I think that it is a really valid argument to say that that's completely jurisdictional. I didn't to mean that the court can't take this under the review at this point in time. I didn't read the judgment language in such a strict fashion that I felt like we could say 61 days means the court's not going to consider it at all. So it is past your 60-day deadline, but I don't know that that is completely jurisdictional in the way that you drafted your judgment.
Interesting back and forth there with the judge asking some pointed questions. Now, he did not rule today on the motion for more restitution, and he's going to take it under advisement, and then he will rule, and we will see if Kohberger has to pay more restitution. for the funeral expenses. And that could be, again, another $27,000. So we'll see. That could be the last Kohberger hearing that we have. I don't, there might be some about evidence. I guess there could be. I don't know if we'll ever see him in court again, because he's not appealing, and the case is done. He doesn't face any more charges or anything. So unless he's charged with something in prison, but I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. And I know a lot of people are like, good, don't ever want to see him again. Okay, let's move on to talk about Martha Moxley, 15-year-old girl in Connecticut who is killed on Halloween, the night before Halloween, I believe, October 30th, 1975. And let me tell you, this is the description about the new podcast. It's called Dead Certain, The Martha Moxley Murder, from NBC News Studios. The series revisits one of America's most scrutinized murder cases, the 1975 killing of 15-year-old Martha Moxley, with unprecedented access, new investigative material, and exclusive interviews. Hosted by veteran journalist Andrew Goldman, the podcast features multiple interviews with Michael Skakel, a relative of the Kennedy family. Yes, that Kennedy family. The royal Kennedy family. Skakel, whose conviction for the murder of Moxley was overturned in 2018, speaks publicly for the first time about the case that defined his life. So, you got the Kennedy family, you've got a 15-year-old girl murdered, you've got this guy who is not convicted for a long time, I think 2005, 30 years after the crime, I believe, and then it's overturned. He's speaking for the first time. That's the elements of this podcast. Across 12 episodes, the weekly podcast delves into the decades of legal battles, media frenzy, and lingering doubts that continue to surround the case as it marks 50 years. Goldman, who was originally hired more than a decade ago by Skakel's cousin, RFK Jr., Health and Human Services guy, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., to research and ghostwrite a book about the case, embarked on his own independent investigation in the years that followed. He's hired to write a book about the case. It gets into his heart and in his mind that he's got to do more. He then launches his own investigation. Through in-depth interviews with key figures, including several of Martha's closest friends, retired FBI agent Jim Murphy, Skakel's brother Stephen, and former LAPD detective Mark Furman, Goldman revisits longstanding questions and unearths new perspectives on this haunting case. I've only listened to one episode. There's 12. I've only listened to one, but I'm really excited to welcome here to Courtroom Insider the journalist behind the project, Andrew Goldman, and the executive producer, Alexa Danner. Well, Andrew, I wanted to get started by saying I appreciated in the first episode that I listened to you talking about how you were a little reluctant to even dive into this story, this case. Tell us why.
I was super reluctant to get into it because I'm in the media and I have been, I've been a journalist for 30 years, and I felt like I had consumed a fair amount of media about the case. And from what I'd consumed, I think that I was pretty certain that I agreed with what I read, and everything suggested that Michael Skakel was the man who, in 1975, murdered Martha Moxley with a golf club. And so, as I think I probably mentioned in the first episode of the podcast, I got an offer from Bobby Kennedy Jr. to write a book that was expressly about exonerating him, at least in the public's mind. And I was torn because, obviously I've watched the Kennedy family for a long time, and I know a lot about the Kennedy family. And although I admire a lot of what they've done, I also think that there's been a lot of bad behavior in the past by the Kennedy family. And I think that there's been a lot of whitewashing of activities by the Kennedy family. So I was in a bit of a moral quandary because I found it interesting. Bobby Kennedy had contacted me not about co-writing a book, but about helping him research and doing some writing on a book so my name wouldn't be on it. But I thought to myself, am I really going to be part of this machine to whitewash somebody who, in my mind at that point, was obviously guilty? And so, as I said in the episode, I talked to my wife about it a lot. I talked to my therapist. And the way I began to think about it was that it was hard to pass up an opportunity that interesting, and also that my name was not going to be on the product, and I could treat it as though a defense lawyer who's defending somebody who might actually be guilty would treat that, which is, keep your mind open and maybe look for holes in the case and see if maybe there's any there. And, as soon as I got into it, I discovered indeed there's quite a bit of there.
Was there one particular thing that changed your mind? Like one day you remember you saw one, bombshell that said, wow, this is it? Or was it a series of things that you uncovered as you kind of put on the objective lenses and re-looked at everything?
I think I spent upwards of a month in an evidence room just, going through these probably tens of thousands of papers. And I would say it's an accumulation of things. I mean, I think one of the things that I think I mentioned in the pilot was I had done a good deal of research before I even decided to get to the point where I would go and look at the evidence. So I had read 3 books on the case. I had read mounds and mounds. I mean, there was, hundreds of stories written in the media. That's my first step as a journalist. I'm sure it's your first step that if you're going into sort of a major story, you consume everything you possibly can. So before I did any looking at the evidence, I consumed everything from the media I possibly could. And then, as soon as I started looking at the evidence, I thought to myself, boy, I never read anything about this. I mean, there's one example in the first episode, which is, it was obviously it is a horrific crime. It's a 15-year-old girl who was murdered. And it was a very, very bloody crime scene. I described, I think, in great detail what was done to her when she was attacked. And, I looked at the photos, and it was, I'm not a crime reporter, but I've seen gory things before. I'd never quite seen anything like it. And what was very interesting about all of the reporting in the case was that although it was an incredibly bloody crime scene, there was never any blood identified outside of the crime scene or even suggested that there was blood outside of the crime scene. And when I was going through the early police reports, I found a report that specifically mentioned some blood found in Belhaven, which is the enclave in which Martha Moxley lived, which I'd never heard about. It was a total mystery to me. And I'd read books that were hundreds of pages, and I would have thought that it would have had some glancing mention at least of this. So, that was one of the first things that kind of got my spidey sense tingling, which is why hadn't anybody reported this before? Because it was obviously interesting, especially given the amount of blood at the crime scene and the fact that whoever had done this obviously probably would have been very bloody, and would have left some residual blood, and there was no blood found anywhere else. So I'm not saying that this is necessarily the key to solving the case, but it just did seem like an oversight that so many people had studied this, but nobody had mentioned this in the same reports that were available to me.
Yeah. So Alexa, as the executive producer, I would imagine that you're kind of doing a lot of the research, booking the interviews, trying to find people that know the facts and the timeline of all of this. As you delve into this, what stood out to you? Like, what made this particular story interesting?
Well, our process was a little bit different. This is NBC News Studios' first partnership with an external journalist. So actually, Andrew brought a lot of the reporting to us, and we've continued to research and report alongside him. He'd done a tremendous amount of legwork across his almost decade of reporting on this story. And there's always more to be uncovered, and we continue every day to find new things, really. I mean, it's just, there's so much information in this case. And I think that sort of answers the second part of your question, which is when Andrew brought us the pilot that he had sort of crafted on his own as a evidence of this story and what it could be, I was just absolutely hooked right away. I didn't know much about the story. I didn't have any real sense of its depth and breadth in terms of the time that it unfolded across, in terms of all the details, in terms of all the suspects over the years. And so that part was really fascinating. But just from a sheer true crime standpoint, I've done a lot of true crime. I really haven't encountered a story like this that's so rich and so full of twists and turns and so layered. Every time you turn one rock over, there's rocks underneath to keep turning over. I mean, it's really, it keeps you so engaged and so invested, and we continue to be challenged by it. I, for, having worked on it now for over a year, and Andrew for 10, and we still can find ways to just sort of jam on it and talk about it and find one little detail to debate and to chase around. So, I think that's one of the things about this podcast is the episodes are long, they're very dense, they're full of information, and there are 12 of them, and we still feel like, there's more to tell, but we're doing our best and trying to do justice to the story in these parameters.
I personally was so happy to see that there was 12 episodes. And when I clicked on episode 1, it was nearly an hour because I love the deep dive. I hate it when you go through like a 4-part series and you're still asking a bunch of questions. And the fact that you were able to sit down with Michael.
Thank God, Nate. I am so glad I've been so scared because I need people. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just,
Oh, that's all right.
It warms my heart to hear that. Okay, I'm sorry.
No, that's me. If it's good enough and I'm interested, I want it all. And then I saw that you actually got Michael Skakel, the suspect who didn't serve time, was convicted of this crime, to speak. I don't want to give away too much, but how did that come about where you were able to actually sit down with him, get him on the record as he denied that he had anything to do with this?
Well, I don't know if I misheard you, but he actually served 11 and a half years in prison he was convicted. And I think that, Michael, I think, one of the things that I think that we'll be discussing, I mean, this is partly a media story, and I think Michael feels very much like the media has painted a portrait of him that isn't really accurate. And I think he's been just generally distrustful of the media. And so Michael, as any good defense attorney probably would have cautioned him, Michael was told for many, many years. I mean, he actually wanted to, he didn't testify in his trial, but he said that he wanted to, and he's wanted to talk for years, but he's been really constrained by, initially the fact that he would be answerable at his murder trial for anything he said. And then after that, because I mean, there's a lot of reasons why somebody wouldn't want to go talk to the media. And I think when you meet Michael, you'll probably understand why maybe his attorneys might not have wanted him to talk to the media, because he's very plain spoken and probably nothing like what you imagine. And so I think getting meeting Michael that first time in 2015 and listening to his story and actually having somebody, I think, who was open to hearing what he had to say, and he had so much to say, that I feel like over that decade, maybe a level of trust was built between us that perhaps I mean, I know that organizations were news organizations were constantly approaching him about cooperating. And I think it was very easy for him to look at what those same news organizations before had said to him in things that he thought were either inaccurate or unfair. So I think it was just a question of getting his trust over a period of time and becoming I mean, I hesitate to say that that we're friends because he is a source of mine, and I think that you're going to find this a very fair portrayal. But I've spent a lot of time with him, and so when you spend a lot of time with somebody, you develop a certain level, kind of an intimacy.
Right.
And I think it was just a question of him dying to tell his story, but just not being able to recognize what would have been a good outlet for it.
What questions do you still have, Andrew, having worked on this for a year, or no, 10 years, having worked on the podcast for the past year? I mean, were there questions answered as you all put this together that you had been, really anxious to get answers to?
I have like 3 episodes worth of questions. Alexa, maybe you can hit that for a second so I can think about it for a second, because I have so many. I'm trying to think of like a good example of a question that I still have.
Yeah. What about you, Alexa?
Well, I think you'll agree with this, Andrew, that one of the big questions is around the initial investigation and the holes that were left in it the things that weren't done by the Greenwich police originally, because they were not accustomed to dealing with murder and they didn't have experience with this type of case. And what slipped through the cracks in those first 48, as Andrew references in the first episode, but also beyond that, in the first days and weeks and months and years of this case, what got lost? What will we never find? What will never be known? I think is such a big question mark hanging over this entire case and this story. So for me, that's the biggest thing. I think that will be the hardest to answer because time, it's been 50 years. I mean, time's going to probably not reveal certain answers to certain questions that we have. And the older the information and the older the part of the story, the harder it is to chase down.
Right.
And I think that what's going to be possibly fascinating and for true crime listeners is that I'm going to take them along on, I think, the journey that I took a little bit in terms of kind of discovering things along the way. And I think that they will share the same questions that I have and the same sort of, Greenwich was not, no fault to any particular Greenwich cop. They just were not accustomed to investigating a case like this. So I hesitate to blame them, but I think that there's going to be all these lost opportunities where I think listeners will be kicking themselves and thinking to themselves, "Oh God, if only they'd searched this place, or taken the clothes of this person." I mean, there's going to be a ton of questions that I think I think as you listen to the series, you're going to probably have a lot of the same questions that I continue to have.
Right.
I would tap onto that. Oh, Nate, just one more thing. I think for listeners, one thing that's really amazing is, Andrew had access to the case file in a way that no other author had access to before. And so what we've been able to do, and what's so great about telling the story in this audio format, is that we have original archival materials and audio tapes from 1975. I mean, these are original police interviews. It just gives the podcast so much texture and really transports people back to that time. You're hearing these kids' voices talking to the police back in 1975. It's really powerful. So I think that's one thing that listeners can look forward to and be excited to sort of immerse themselves at every chronological stage of this story, because it was widely covered all 50 years. And so we are incorporating that and weaving it in a way that really brings it to life.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And Nate, I do have to mention, I mean, the podcast was, I did produce a pilot, which ultimately got into NBC's hands, which has just been such a boon, not only because I got to work with and meet with Alexa and the amazing team there, but when she talks about the texture, not only is it the archive that I was able to bring, but NBC, of course, NBC News has this amazing archive of interviews with all of the figures, interviews that I never in a million years working with any other non-major network news organization would have had access to. So not only are you going to get the texture of the old interviews, you're going to be able to hear things from NBC News's archives that's just unbelievable. And sometimes I listen to an episode and Alexa will surprise me with something, and I say to myself, "I can't believe you found that is unreal."
Yeah.
You guys must have a really, really amazingly searchable archive. So,
That's great.
I think it was I just feel so. I mean, it's very cliched, but so blessed to have found this as a partner.
Right. Yeah. To bring together the two forces. I got to tell you, I like it because I was not familiar with the story. And those are the type of stories I like. If to come in cold, I don't Google anything. I don't, look up anything. And so the fact that a lot of our viewers may not have been familiar with it, especially here in Idaho or in the West, it should lend to some really good listening over the next few weeks. Is there anything that you guys want to add?
Well, that's sort of what I think I'm going to love about this is actually my kids, my very grouchy. I have a 15 and 16-year-old, so this story has taken special resonance in the last couple of years because it deals with kids who were 15 at the time, but they actually like the show and they don't like anything. And I know that people who live in Greenwich, even friends, I've heard from intimates of Martha who have said, "Gosh, I didn't," even from listening to the first episode, "Gosh, I didn't know that." So I think that even if you were living in Belhaven at the time, you're going to learn something. But I think that it's going to be presented in a way so that if you'd never heard about the case, as my sons had never heard about the case, I think it's going to, I hope, grab your attention in a way that it grabbed people's attention for the 5 decades that it's existed. I mean, this was a cold case from 1975 until 2002. And in this part of the country, it was a very big deal, not only because of the tragedy of it and the age of the victim, but because of the fact that it involved, cousins of the Kennedys. It involved, nephews of Robert F. Kennedy. So I think we have a little something for, I think we have a lot of something for everybody, actually.
Right.
Alexa,
Alexa, what
what do
about you?
I mean, I think that's perfect. I do think we can be really proud of with this is it's incredibly immersive storytelling. I mean, to Andrew's point, I really think that just a story well told is so engrossing, and this story lends itself to that. And Andrew has an amazing writing voice and speaking voice. I haven't told you this, Andrew. Somebody told me you sounded like Anthony Bourdain.
Oh,
So,
man.
yeah.
I'm looking seriously. I'm just all I want to do. No, I'm joking. Is cash out and become a voiceover artist. No, I'm joking. That's not really. I don't think I have it, but I do. You know what I have? I think I have a face for radio.
Well, it's personal. I like the fact that it's personal. I mean, you kind of, the episode I heard, you let us into your life, the struggle you had in your mind of whether you should even pursue the story. You mentioned going to your therapist, talking to your wife, talking with your family. I kind of like that when the curtains peeled back a little bit and we get to know the person behind the story, which is what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, we'll keep that to a minimum. I think the story is much more interesting than I am, but I do think that there's absolutely, I'm very proud that NBC has allowed me to maintain my voice. I think it'll be in certain ways opinionated, but one thing I want to do is allow the reporting to speak for itself. I would like people to hear it and not feel like I'm trying to drag them in one direction or another. And I think that as the series goes on, I think it's very possible that people are going to make very, very different conclusions about what happened that night, because that's the greatest mystery of all, is what happened, around 10 p.m. on October 30th, 1975 in Greenwich, Connecticut. That's the thing that's that's the biggest question, actually, is, it's somewhat dark, but I mean, sometimes I just think, gosh, if only I could sort of see what actually happened. Because even if we know who did it, there's going to be a plethora of mysteries left over.
Right. Well, thank you both, Andrew, Alexa. Appreciate you taking time to chat with me.
Nate,
Thanks.
thank you so much. I really enjoyed it. I think it's really my top 3 most beautiful states. Do you think Idaho is the most beautiful state?
Well, I've spent a lot of time here, so I like to see the beauty around us, around Idaho. But yes, we're going into winter season. I'm in East Idaho, where we get really cold winters. So, yeah, it is
That I
beautiful
like
state.
less, but it is. I really love your state, so
Yeah.
I'm
Well, thank
glad
you.
to be here virtually.
Again, the name of the podcast, Dead Certain, The Martha Moxley Murder. You can listen to it wherever you get your podcasts. I'd love to know your thoughts. What do you think about it? Let me know. And I want to thank Andrew again for joining me, and Alexa too. And I have to thank newspapers.com. So here's what I did. I went on to newspapers.com. I typed in Martha Moxley. Look how many stories there are on this. Going back again, 1975, before a lot of things are archived on the internet. Newspapers.com has the archive on this case. You can go back and do your own deep dive. And I imagine I should have asked Andrew if he used newspapers.com. I bet he did, to go find the original stories written by AP, the reporters on the ground, long before the days of the internet. There's so much here, and you can do this with this case, with other cases, with whatever you want. Big thanks to newspapers.com for sponsoring Courtroom Insider. And one other thing before I go tonight, last night, many of you emailed me about this. I said that we had a promo code for our new shirts at eastidahonews.com/shop. On the third-party site, we have some new Secret Santa shirts and some new true crime shirts, like this one, which I love, which Staying Home Solving Crimes again. There's a t-shirt on this, a sweatshirt, and a hoodie. And then this one, I'm Here for the Evidence, EIN 208. 208 is Idaho's area code. That one's also in a t-shirt, sweatshirt, and a hoodie. And then our Secret Santa ones. Well, I told you that you could use the promo code SECRET, SECRET, and get 15% off everything. But many of you were like, it doesn't work. I can't get it. Guess what? It was only valid on Secret Santa items. My bad. Sorry. So I told our team, open it up. Let's open it up to all the products through Friday, only through the 8th, 15% off. Use the promo code SECRET and use it in our third-party store, which is go to shop, click on that top link where it says more merch. Go on there. It will be shipped to you. You'll get it well ahead of Christmas. We ship anywhere in the world, although I don't think we go to Canada right now. Sorry, there's probably a few other countries we don't go to because of issues with tariffs and shipping and strikes and stuff like that. But we ship most places in the world, and it'll be there in time for Christmas, Hanukkah, all the other holidays that are coming up. And here, when it's winter and getting cold, it's the perfect shirt to snuggle in. And if you love true crime and you know people that love true crime, use that promo code SECRET. You get 15% off on these items. And my apologies for getting the information wrong last night, but hopefully it should work good tonight. Here's where you can find me. I'm on Facebook, Nate Eaton Reporter. Give me a follow if you haven't already. Also on X at Nate News Now, and on Insta, n.eaton, and YouTube. Thanks for subscribing to our channel and for following us and supporting us. Really appreciate it. And it's because of you that we do what we do. Everybody, tomorrow night, we will be back with another episode. A 13-year-old girl on a hot summer night leaves her home to meet a friend just down the street and vanishes. To this day, there's been no sign of her. Her sister will be here. Her sister, who lives in Idaho Falls, will be here to tell the story that is haunting, that has so many questions, and hopefully we can maybe get a few more answers about this case that has pretty much gone cold. That'll be tomorrow night on Courtroom Insider, 7 o'clock Mountain Time on the East Idaho News YouTube channel. Until then, everybody have a good night. We'll see you then.